Welcome to Teolumen Insights, where we reveal the hidden forces that shape the way you live and show you how to use them to create real transformation and supercharge your health, mindset, and daily life. Here are your hosts, Emma Greenwood and Nathan Sinclair.
Welcome back to Teolumen Insights. We're diving deep into the world of Dr. Anatoly Akimov today.
A very prominent figure in torsion field research.
That's right. And we're also going to look at the intersection with something called psychotronic warfare.
It's a fascinating and somewhat unsettling area of study.
Absolutely. So buckle up, everybody.
Let's get started.
I mean, when I first came across this whole topic, I had so many questions, like, who was this Dr. Akimov?
Yeah.
What are torsion fields?
Right.
What does this have to do with psychotronic warfare? It sounds like something straight out of a science fiction movie.
It does, but the research behind it is surprisingly extensive, particularly in the former Soviet Union.
Okay, well, let's start with Dr. Akimov himself then.
Sure. He was a respected scientist, held prominent positions at institutions like the Moscow Scientific Research Institute of Radio and the Research Institute for Communication Systems and Control.
So not just some fringe scientist working in a basement lab.
Not at all. He was a department head at the Research Institute of Microdevices, which shows the level of recognition he had within the scientific community at the time.
Okay, that's interesting. So what was he researching that led to all this talk about psychotronic warfare?
His main focus was on something called torsion fields, which he believed were generated by the spin of elementary particles.
Spin of elementary particles. That sounds pretty complex. Can you maybe break that down a bit?
Sure. Think of it like this. Every electron, proton, neutron, the tiny particles that make up everything around us, they're all spinning.
Okay.
Akimov's theory was that this spinning creates a field, similar to how a rotating electric charge creates a magnetic field.
Gotcha. I think I'm following so far.
Yeah.
But what makes torsion fields different from, say, gravity or electromagnetism?
That's a key difference, and what makes them so intriguing. Unlike those other fields, torsion fields are thought to transmit information, not energy in the classical sense.
Information, so like sending a message?
In a way, yes. But we're not talking about radio waves or anything like that. Think of it more like a subtle influence that can affect matter, and according to Akimov, potentially even consciousness itself.
Consciousness. Now that's where things start to get really interesting and maybe a little unsettling. So how does this all tie into psychotronic warfare then?
That's where the concept of manipulating consciousness for military purposes comes in.
Okay.
Think of it as a type of non-lethal weaponry that could potentially influence thoughts, emotions, and even behavior.
That sounds pretty scary, to be honest. Are we talking about mind control here?
Some people believe so. The term psychotronic warfare definitely conjures up those kinds of images. And there are claims, though controversial, that the Soviet Union was actively researching this.
Really?
Under code names like SHAR, potentially using powerful radar systems to influence populations in the West.
Radar systems? How could those be used for something like that?
That's where the link to torsion fields comes in. Some researchers believe that these radar systems could be modified to generate and direct torsion fields, potentially affecting the mental state of individuals or even large groups of people.
Hold on, are we saying that they were trying to beam mind control rays at people using giant radar ditches? That sounds a bit far-fetched, doesn't it?
It does sound far-fetched, and the scientific evidence to support these claims is debated.
Okay.
But remember, this was during the Cold War,
Right.
a time of intense secrecy and paranoia. It was an era where both sides were exploring all sorts of unconventional technologies, pushing the boundaries of science in pursuit of any potential advantage.
That's true. It was a time when fear and suspicion fueled a lot of scientific exploration, particularly in the realm of espionage and warfare. So if these torsion fields could theoretically be used for mind control, what kind of effects are we talking about? Could they really make someone do something against their will?
That's a tough question to answer, and there's no scientific consensus on the matter. Some researchers believe that torsion fields could influence thoughts and emotions, perhaps even making someone more susceptible to suggestion.
Right.
But the idea of directly controlling someone's actions, like a puppet on strings, is still highly speculative.
Okay, so it's more about influence and manipulation than outright control.
That seems to be the prevailing theory, at least based on the available research. But even the possibility of influencing thoughts and emotions on a large scale is pretty unsettling, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely unsettling. It raises all sorts of ethical questions about the use of such technologies, especially for military purposes. And this Viktor Sedletsky person that you mentioned earlier, he claimed there was a whole Soviet program dedicated to this.
Yes, Sedletsky, although a controversial figure,
Yeah.
made some pretty bold claims about a Soviet psychotronics program, suggesting that they were experimenting with these technologies on a significant scale. He even mentioned specific facilities like Chernobyl 2 and Krasnoyarsk 26, which were powerful radar stations as potential testing grounds for these psychotronic weapons.
So we're not just talking about lab experiments here. He's claiming that they were actually deploying these weapons in the real world.
That's what he claimed, although it's important to note that his claims have been disputed by others. It's hard to separate fact from fiction in this area of research, especially given the level of secrecy surrounding it, both during the Cold War and even today.
It's like trying to piece together a puzzle with half the pieces missing and the other half potentially fake. But this idea of influencing minds with technology, it's not entirely new, is it? I mean, haven't people been fascinated by the idea of mind control for centuries?
You're absolutely right. The fascination with manipulating consciousness is nothing new.
Right.
In fact, Russia has a long history of exploring these concepts. Even before the 1917 revolution, there were individuals like A. Barchenko, who were delving into mental suggestion and thought transference.
So Akimov's research wasn't happening in a vacuum. It was building upon a tradition that had been going on for decades.
Exactly. And it wasn't just individuals working in isolation. There were organized efforts to study these phenomena. The Russian Society of Experimental Psychology even formed a commission dedicated to studying mind reading back in 1890.
A commission on mind reading. That's incredible. It seems like this fascination with mental phenomena runs deep in Russia. But let's get back to Akimov and his research. If these torsion fields could theoretically transmit information and influence consciousness, did he envision any practical applications for them beyond the potential for warfare?
Absolutely. In fact, one of his most ambitious ideas was the possibility of using torsion fields for communication. He believed that they could allow for instantaneous transmission of information across vast distances, potentially even faster than the speed of light.
Wait, faster than the speed of light? Isn't that supposed to be impossible?
According to our current understanding of physics, yes. But Akimov believed that torsion fields operated outside the constraints of conventional physics. He argued that they tapped into a deeper level of reality where the laws of physics as we know them don't necessarily apply.
That's pretty mind-blowing. If he was right, it would completely revolutionize communication. Imagine being able to communicate instantly with someone on the other side of the planet, or even on another planet entirely.
Exactly. And that wasn't his only idea for practical applications. Akimov also believed that torsion fields could have significant implications for biology and medicine. He conducted experiments that suggested that these fields could influence plant growth, potentially even accelerating it.
So like supercharging plant growth. That could have huge implications for agriculture.
Yes, and he didn't stop there. He believed that torsion fields could also influence human health, potentially being used to treat diseases and enhance overall well-being.
Okay, now that's where my skepticism kicks in. I can see how these fields might be able to influence something like plant growth, but healing diseases with invisible fields. That sounds a bit far-fetched, doesn't it?
It definitely pushes the boundaries of conventional medicine. But remember, Akimov was working from a different paradigm, a different understanding of how the universe works. He believed that torsion fields interacted with the subtle energy fields that are said to exist around all living things, influencing their biological processes.
So we're venturing into the realm of bioenergetics and alternative medicine here.
You could say that. And it's important to acknowledge that these ideas are not widely accepted within the mainstream scientific community. But Akimov's research, whether you agree with it or not, opens up some fascinating questions about the nature of reality, consciousness, and the potential of these unseen forces.
It definitely does. It's like peering into a world where science and mysticism intersect, where the boundaries between the known and the unknown become blurred. But before we get too carried away with the theoretical possibilities, let's bring things back down to earth a bit. One of our sources, a paper focusing on the historical context of psychotronics research in Russia, mentions that the first non-biological, high-penetrating generators were created in the 1960s by a researcher named Robert Pavlida in Czechoslovakia.
Yes, Pavlida's work is fascinating, although also controversial. He claimed to have developed devices that could generate these high-penetrating energies, which he believed could influence various physical and biological processes.
High-penetrating generators. What exactly were those supposed to do?
The source doesn't go into great detail about their specific function, but it does mention a rather dramatic event. Pavlida's presentation at the first International Conference on Psychotronics in Prague in 1973 caused a sensation.
Yeah, sensation. What was so sensational about it?
Well, his experiments, along with those of another Czechoslovak researcher named D. Kremeski, purportedly demonstrated the possibility of remotely impacting moving objects using some form of energy.
Wow.
Pavlida even designed a device called an accumulator to enhance these effects. He claimed that these accumulators, made from various materials and shapes, could accelerate the growth of bean sprouts and even purify water contaminated with industrial waste.
Wait, so he's claiming that these devices could influence the movement of objects, accelerate plant growth, and even purify water. That's a lot of extraordinary claims. Did he have any proof to back them up?
That's where things get tricky. While Pavlida's claims were certainly intriguing, they were met with skepticism from the wider scientific community. His work was often shrouded in secrecy, and he was reluctant to share the details of his devices or his methods.
So it's hard to know how much of it was genuine scientific discovery and how much was hype or perhaps even deliberate misinformation.
Exactly. The source mentions that while Pavlida's work was reported in some mainstream Soviet scientific journals, it never received the rigorous scientific scrutiny and independent verification needed to gain wider acceptance.
That's understandable. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, as they say. But even if we take Pavlita's claims with a grain of salt, it's still interesting to see how his work was perceived within the context of Soviet scientific exploration at the time. The fact that his research was presented at an international conference and reported in mainstream journals suggests that there was at least some level of interest and perhaps even support for these unconventional ideas within certain circles.
Absolutely. And it highlights the fact that the boundaries between mainstream science and what we might call fringe science were often more blurred in the Soviet Union than they were in the West. There was a greater willingness to explore unconventional ideas, particularly in areas like parapsychology and psychotronics.
That makes sense given the political and ideological climate of the Soviet Union at the time. There was a strong emphasis on scientific progress and technological innovation, and perhaps a greater openness to exploring ideas that challenged the established Western scientific paradigms. The source also mentions the involvement of multiple prominent Soviet research institutions in these unconventional programs. It highlights contracts between Akimov's Research Institute of Microdevices and various other institutions for the study of spin fields, which, as we discussed earlier, is likely another term for torsion fields.
That's right. Akimov wasn't working in isolation. There was a network of researchers, institutions, and even government funding behind these programs. This wasn't just a few scientists tinkering in their labs. It suggests a concerted effort to explore the potential of these technologies, perhaps even for military applications.
That's pretty significant. It paints a picture of a much larger and more organized research effort than I initially imagined. It makes you wonder about the extent of these programs and what their ultimate goals were. Were they purely scientific, or were there more clandestine objectives involved? And if so, what ethical guidelines, if any, were in place to govern such research? The source also mentions a shift in the landscape of psychotronics research around 1989, a time of significant political upheaval in the Soviet Union. It states that before this period, research into high-penetrating radiation and its effects on various systems, including biological ones, was fragmented.
Yes, it seems that before 1989, research in this area was somewhat scattered, with different groups working independently and often unaware of each other's progress. This lack of coordination likely hindered the development of these technologies.
But after 1989, things seem to have changed.
That's right. The source highlights the emergence of several new sensors designed to detect these elusive, high-penetrating emissions. This technological advancement, alongside increased communication and collaboration among researchers, marked a significant turning point in the field.
So they were finally starting to develop the tools and the infrastructure needed to study these phenomena in a more rigorous and systematic way.
Exactly. One of the key figures mentioned is A.V. Bobrov, who developed a sensor based on the electric double layer, or EDL. His work, alongside that of others like G.A. Sergev, Y.P. Krapchenko, and researchers at the Institute of Physics in St. Petersburg, paved the way for more sophisticated detection methods.
And this development of reliable sensors was a game changer, wasn't it? I mean, if you can't even detect these alleged energies, it's pretty hard to study them, let alone weaponize them.
Absolutely. It allowed for more precise and repeatable experiments, potentially providing the much-needed evidence to support or perhaps refute some of the more extraordinary claims within psychotronics. The source states that by 2003-2004, instrumental psychotronics had entered a new era thanks to these advancements in sensor technology.
So it seems like the field was making some real progress. at least in terms of developing the tools and techniques needed to study these phenomena in a more scientific way. But the source also mentions a fascinating trend. As government funding for these programs dwindled, independent researchers and even non-technical experts began to take the lead in exploring these phenomena. This shift suggests a growing interest in psychotronics outside the traditional realms of government-funded research.
That's an interesting observation. It seems that as the Soviet Union collapsed and government funding dried up, the research didn't entirely disappear. It simply shifted to a different arena. Perhaps driven by a combination of scientific curiosity, entrepreneurial spirit, and maybe even a bit of a mystical or spiritual quest.
It makes you wonder what sorts of discoveries are being made in these less visible corners of scientific exploration, far from the scrutiny of mainstream science and government oversight. The source also highlights a rather sobering aspect of this research, specifically in the context of the Soviet Union and later Russia. The role of the state in shaping and controlling what was studied and what was suppressed. It mentions that throughout the Soviet era, the government selectively funded certain areas of parapsychology while actively blocking others.
Yes, it's important to remember that this research was taking place within a very specific political and ideological context. The Soviet government had a vested interest in controlling the flow of information and in promoting research that aligned with its own goals and objectives.
So it's likely that the research agenda was influenced by political considerations as much as by scientific curiosity.
Almost certainly. The source points to the impact of international isolation on Soviet research. Limited contact with researchers from other countries may have led to a unique and perhaps somewhat insular approach to psychotronics in the Soviet Union.
It's fascinating to consider how those external factors shaped the direction of research and perhaps even contributed to the development of some of the more unconventional theories and claims that emerged from this era. The source also delves into the work of Gian Dolnev and his colleagues at the Center for Energy and Information Technologies at the St. Petersburg State Institute of Fine Mechanics and Optics. Their research, conducted between 1995 and 1998, focused on the impact of high-penetrating radiation on various materials and systems.
Dolnev's work is notable for its multidisciplinary approach. His team utilized a wide range of sensors, including biological, optical, magnetic, and thermal ones, to try to detect and understand these elusive energies.
It's amazing how diverse the applications of this research could be. It seems to touch upon so many different fields, from physics and engineering to biology and psychology. What's interesting is that they utilized a wide range of sensors, including biological, optical, magnetic, and thermal ones, suggesting a multifaceted approach to understanding these phenomena. Their work also included studying the bioelectrogenesis of plants, hinting at potential applications in agriculture or bioengineering.
Absolutely. It's a testament to the truly interdisciplinary nature of psychotronics. And as we've seen, it also raises some profound ethical and philosophical questions.
Speaking of ethical questions, one of our sources jumps headfirst into the potential dangers of psychotronic weapons falling into the wrong hands. It specifically mentions concerns about their use for mood management and mind control, which paints a rather chilling picture.
It's definitely unsettling. The source even mentions attempts to address these concerns on an international level, citing the European Parliament's 1999 resolution calling for an international ban on the development and use of such technologies.
So even back then, there was recognition at the highest levels of government that these technologies posed a potential threat to humanity.
Exactly. And that recognition has only grown in recent years as our understanding of the brain and consciousness has advanced.
Right.
And as technologies like artificial intelligence and neuroengineering have emerged.
It's like we're entering a new era of potential mind control where the lines between science fiction and reality are becoming increasingly blurred. The source also highlights a proposed Russian federal law titled Informational Psychological Safety, aimed at protecting citizens from the misuse of psychotronic technologies.
That's a fascinating example of how governments are trying to grapple with the potential threats posed by these technologies. It's a recognition that the mind is a new battleground in warfare and espionage, and that citizens need to be protected from these invisible attacks.
It makes you wonder if there are already covert programs in place using these technologies for nefarious purposes.
It's certainly a possibility, although hard to prove conclusively. The world of intelligence and espionage is notoriously secretive, and it's likely that much of the research in this area remains classified. One of our sources even delves into the potential applications of psychotronic technology for less... It sounds incredibly futuristic.
Surgeon regenerator, what is that?
The source doesn't go into much detail about how such a device would work, but the very idea suggests the potential for using psychotronics in the field of medicine, perhaps even for healing or tissue regeneration.
It's like something out of Star Trek. Imagine being able to regenerate damaged organs or tissues using some form of psychotronic technology. The possibilities are truly mind-boggling.
They are indeed, and it highlights how this research, despite its controversial nature and potential for misuse, also holds the promise of incredible advancements in various fields.
It's a double-edged sword, like so many other technological advancements throughout history. It has the potential to both heal and harm, to liberate and to enslave. It all comes down to how we choose to use it.
Wise words. And that's why it's so important to have open and honest discussions about these technologies, to explore both their potential benefits and their potential risks. The source also mentions several other intriguing applications like resolving conflict and translation of consciousness, which hint at the potential for using psychotronics to influence social dynamics and even understand the very nature of consciousness itself.
It's a lot to take in. We've gone from potential weapons of war to medical marvels and even tools for understanding the human mind. It's a wild ride.
It is indeed. And it's just the tip of the iceberg.
The source also delves into some darker and more controversial aspects of potential psychotronic research. It mentions projects with names like the Terminator, Mutant, and Brain Bomb, which don't exactly inspire confidence in the ethical considerations of those involved.
It's a chilling reminder that not all research is conducted with benevolent intentions. The very existence of projects with such names suggests a potential disregard for the well-being of individuals and the potential consequences of unleashing such powerful technologies.
It's like a glimpse into a world where the pursuit of power and control trumps all other considerations. One specific example mentioned in the source is a project called Radio Voice, which purportedly aims to project thoughts and courses of action directly into a person's mind.
That's a concept that strikes at the very core of what it means to be human, our ability to think for ourselves, to make our own choices.
It's terrifying. Imagine having your thoughts and actions dictated by some external force. It raises questions about free will, individual autonomy, and the very definition of what it means to be human.
And those are questions that we as a society need to grapple with as technology continues to advance and blur the lines between what we once thought possible and what we now know to be within our grasp.
It's a challenge that we can't afford to ignore. One of our sources specifically addresses the challenges of uncovering the truth about psychotronic weapons, highlighting the secrecy and misinformation surrounding such research. It mentions that much of the information is classified as national security information, making it extremely difficult for journalists and the general public to gain access.
That's one of the biggest obstacles to understanding the true extent of research and development in this area. The veil of secrecy makes it very difficult to separate fact from fiction, legitimate scientific inquiry from wild speculation and conspiracy theories.
So we're talking about a veil of secrecy that's incredibly difficult to penetrate. It makes you wonder how much we don't know about these programs and what other potential threats might be lurking in the shadows.
It's a reminder that we're living in a world where powerful forces are operating behind the scenes, shaping the course of events in ways that we may not fully understand.
It's a world where knowledge is power, and those who control information hold the keys to the kingdom. The source also describes an initiative by the Russian Federation at the United Nations to enact a global ban on the development and use of mind control technology.
That's an interesting development. It suggests that at least some governments are starting to take the potential threat of these technologies seriously. It's a recognition that the mind is a new battleground in warfare and espionage, and that we need international agreements and regulations to prevent the proliferation of these weapons.
It's a glimmer of hope in a landscape that often feels quite bleak. The fact that such an initiative was even proposed suggests that there's at least some international recognition of the dangers posed by these weapons.
It's also a reminder that even within governments and intelligence agencies, there are individuals who are concerned about the ethical implications of these technologies and are working to prevent their misuse.
It gives me some hope that perhaps we can find a way to harness the power of these technologies for good, while also safeguarding ourselves from their potential for harm. The source also includes a fascinating detail about a device called Miranda, which purportedly utilizes psychotronic principles for medical purposes. It's described as a side product of psychotronic weapons research developed under a joint agreement between the KGB and the CIA in 1990.
Miranda. That's an intriguing name. What was this device supposed to do?
The source claims that it emits sound electromagnetic impulses that interact with the patient's body. If the body doesn't resonate with these impulses, it supposedly triggers a diagnostic process.
So it's like a psychotronic version of an MRI or a CAT scan, using sound and electromagnetic waves to diagnose illnesses.
Because that's what the source suggests. It's a reminder that even the most secretive, potentially dangerous research can yield unexpected benefits.
Absolutely. It's a testament to the ingenuity of scientists and engineers, and it highlights the potential for these technologies to be used for good to improve human health and well-being. However, the fact that it was supposedly developed under a joint KGB-CIA agreement raises some eyebrows.
Right, a joint KGB-CIA project. Now that's unexpected.
It certainly speaks to the complexity and often shadowy nature of research and development in this area.
It's a reminder that the lines between good and evil, between beneficial and harmful applications of technology, are often blurred, especially when national security and geopolitical interests are involved. Another intriguing detail mentioned in this source is the involvement of a Russian politician named Vladimir Lopatin, who served on security committees in the Russian Republic, the Russian State Duma, and the Parliament of the Union of Independent States. Lopatin, a staunch advocate for international control of psychotronic weapons, authored a book titled Psychotronic Weapon and the Security of Russia.
Lopatin's work is significant because he was someone with first-hand knowledge of these programs and a deep understanding of their potential impact on global security.
So he wasn't just some armchair theorist or conspiracy theorist. He was someone who had actually been involved in these programs and had seen firsthand the potential dangers they posed.
Exactly. And his advocacy for international control highlights the growing concern within certain circles about the proliferation of these weapons. He was particularly worried about the potential for these technologies to be used for mass mind control, for manipulating populations and undermining democracy.
It's a chilling thought, but it's also reassuring to know that there were individuals like Lopatin who recognized the dangers and were actively working to mitigate them.
It gives us hope that even within the often secretive world of intelligence and national security, there are individuals who are committed to ethical principles and who are working to prevent the misuse of these powerful technologies. The source also mentions Lopatin's belief that psychotronic weapons utilize something called torsion fields, which we've discussed before. He even references a book on leptonic fields by A.F. Okatrin and V.U. Tatur, a work that was apparently classified under Russian national security information law.
Leptonic fields, is that another term for torsion fields?
It seems likely. The terminology used to describe these phenomena varies quite a bit, which can make it confusing to follow the research. But the key point is that Lopatin believed that these fields, whatever you call them, were the underlying mechanism behind psychotronic weapons. And the fact that a book on this topic was classified suggests that the Russian government was taking this research very seriously.
It's another example of the secrecy surrounding this research. The fact that a book on leptonic fields was classified suggests that there's a lot more going on beneath the surface than we might realize. And the connection to Akhmov's work on torsion fields is certainly intriguing.
It is. It suggests a potential link between different areas of research that were, on the surface, quite distinct. But when you dig deeper, you start to see the connections, the shared theories, the common threads that tie them together.
It's like uncovering a hidden network of research and development, a secret history of science that's only now starting to come to light. The source also describes a rather unsettling incident involving a Russian journalist who volunteered to sit in front of a psychotronic generator as part of a television series on psychotronic weapons. The journalist reported experiencing disorientation, difficulty concentrating, and a feeling of something stifling his brain.
That's a chilling account. It provides some anecdotal evidence to support the claims that these devices can have a real impact on human cognition.
It's one thing to read about these technologies in theory, but it's quite another to hear a first-hand account of their effects. It makes it much more real, much more tangible.
Absolutely. And it raises serious ethical questions about the use of such technology, even for seemingly innocuous purposes like entertainment.
It's a stark reminder that we should never underestimate the power of technology to influence our minds and bodies, both for good and for ill. The source also mentions a device called the biophysical reinforcer, Metatron Miranda, which sounds like something straight out of a science fiction novel.
Metatron Miranda, that's quite a name. What was this device supposed to do?
The source claims that this device was developed in Russia under an American license, based on an agreement between the KGB and the CIA. It's described as emitting sound electromagnetic impulses that can diagnose ailments by analyzing the body's resonance patterns.
It sounds like an attempt to merge Western and Soviet technologies, perhaps combining American expertise in electronics with Russian research into bioenergetics and psychotronics.
It's amazing how this research seems to straddle the line between science and science fiction, and the involvement of both the KGB and the CIA in its development adds another layer of intrigue.
It certainly does. It's a reminder that the world of espionage and intelligence often operates in ways that are far stranger than fiction.
It's a world where the pursuit of knowledge and power often intertwines with secrecy, deception, and a willingness to push ethical boundaries. But let's move on to another fascinating aspect of this research, one that delves into the realm of manipulating the natural world. The source also delves into the potential use of psychotronic technology for influencing or even controlling weather patterns. It mentions a project aimed at remote psychophysical influence on troops and population by torsional radiation, which suggests a truly unsettling level of control over the natural world.
Weather manipulation as a weapon. That's a concept with enormous implications, both in terms of its potential destructive power and the ethical questions it raises. Imagine being able to create storms, droughts, or even earthquakes to target specific populations or regions.
It's a terrifying thought. And it's not just a theoretical concept. The source mentions the American HARP system as a potential example of this kind of technology.
HARP, which stands for High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, is a research facility in Alaska designed to study the ionosphere, the upper layer of the Earth's atmosphere. It uses high-powered radio waves to excite the ionosphere, creating temporary disturbances that can be studied. It's a legitimate scientific endeavor, but it's also been the subject of much speculation and conspiracy theories.
That's right. Some people believe that HARP's powerful radio waves could be used to manipulate weather patterns, disrupt communications, or even cause earthquakes.
Those claims are highly controversial and not supported by mainstream science. However, the fact that such a powerful technology exists and that it's operated by the military naturally raises concerns.
It's a reminder that even technologies that are intended for peaceful purposes can have unintended consequences and can potentially be misused. Speaking of potentially far-reaching consequences, one of our sources mentions the concept of informational psychological warfare, which sounds like something straight out of a dystopian novel.
Informational psychological warfare is essentially the use of information, propaganda, and psychological manipulation to influence and control populations. It's a form of warfare that's become increasingly prevalent in the digital age, where the lines between truth and falsehood are often blurred.
Right.
And where information spreads rapidly through social media and other online platforms.
It's a sobering reminder that warfare is no longer confined to the battlefield. It can be waged in the minds of individuals, through the manipulation of information and the exploitation of our psychological vulnerabilities.
Exactly. And this is where the potential intersection of psychotronics and informational psychological warfare becomes truly concerning. Imagine a world where governments or other powerful actors could use psychotronic technologies to amplify their propaganda efforts, to implant thoughts and emotions into the minds of their citizens, or even to suppress dissent and control behavior on a massive scale.
It's a terrifying thought. It's like a form of mind control that could potentially undermine democracy, freedom of thought, and individual autonomy.
It's a threat that we need to be aware of and that we need to develop safeguards against. We need to promote media literacy, critical thinking skills, and a healthy skepticism of information that is presented to us, especially online. We need to be aware of the potential for manipulation and to be discerning consumers of information.
It's a challenge for sure, but it's one that we can't afford to ignore. But let's delve a little deeper into the specifics of this informational psychological warfare. One of our sources describes a chilling scenario where psychotronic generators are used to manipulate the moods and behaviors of soldiers on the battlefield. It even mentions a specific incident during the failed coup against Gorbachev in 1991, where the General Kobets warned defenders of the Russian White House about the potential use of psychotronic weapons.
That's a fascinating anecdote. Although it's difficult to know for sure whether Kobets' warning was based on credible intelligence or simply on speculation and fear. But it highlights the fact that these technologies were being discussed at the highest levels of government and military, and that there was a real concern about their potential use in warfare.
It's a reminder that the Cold War was a time of intense paranoia, and that both sides were willing to explore any potential advantage, even if it meant venturing into the realm of unconventional and potentially dangerous technologies.
Absolutely. And the legacy of that era continues to shape our understanding of these technologies and the potential threats they pose. The source also mentions the potential use of psychotronic weapons against civilian populations, highlighting concerns about mass production of these devices and their potential for causing widespread harm.
That's a terrifying thought. Imagine a world where governments or other powerful actors could use these technologies to control the minds and behaviors of entire populations, to quell dissent, to enforce conformity, or even to commit acts of genocide. It's like something out of a dystopian nightmare.
It's certainly a chilling scenario, and it underscores the importance of international cooperation, transparency, and ethical guidelines to prevent the proliferation and misuse of these technologies.
The source also describes a rather bizarre incident involving a psychotronic device called Miranda, which was supposedly developed in Russia under a
American license based on an agreement between the KGB and the CIA.
Right.
Described as a medical device that emits sound electromagnetic impulses to diagnose ailments. But the circumstances surrounding its development and its alleged connection to psychotronic weapons research raise serious questions.
It's another example of how the world of espionage and intelligence often operates in ways that are far stranger than fiction.
And it highlights the need for transparency and accountability to ensure that these powerful technologies are not used for nefarious purposes.
Exactly, and that transparency is especially crucial when we're dealing with technologies that have the potential to manipulate our minds, our bodies, and even the very fabric of reality itself.
It's a lot to take in. We've covered everything from the theoretical underpinnings of torsion fields to the potential applications and ethical concerns of psychotronic technology. It's a world that's both fascinating and frightening, and it raises questions that we as a society need to confront head-on.
It's a journey into the unknown, and it's a journey that we're all taking together, whether we realize it or not.
And that, my friend, is why we delve into these deep dives, because knowledge, even when it's unsettling, is power, and understanding the forces that shape our world, both seen and unseen, is essential for navigating the challenges that lie ahead. But that's conversation for another deep dive. For now, let's take a moment to reflect on what we've learned about Dr. Anatoly Akhimov and his controversial research into torsion fields and psychotronic warfare.
It's been a fascinating and thought-provoking journey, and I encourage everyone listening to continue exploring these topics, to ask questions and to engage in critical thinking.
Exactly, because the more we understand about the world around us, the better equipped we'll be to navigate the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead. And speaking of continuing our exploration, there's another aspect of this research that I find particularly intriguing, the idea of developing defenses against psychotronic influence.
Defenses, like some kind of mental shield against these mind control rays.
Exactly. One source mentions a concept called a psi shield, a device supposedly designed to protect individuals from harmful psychotronic emissions. It's fascinating to see how this research delved into both offensive and defensive applications of these technologies.
It's like an arms race. But in the realm of the mind, one side develops weapons to manipulate consciousness, while the other seeks to build shields to protect against those very weapons.
Precisely, and that dynamic highlights the inherent duality of scientific advancement, the constant tension between the potential for good and the potential for harm. Every new discovery brings with it the possibility of both progress and destruction, and it's up to us as a society to guide that progress in a direction that benefits all of humanity rather than just a select few.
That's a profound thought. It makes you wonder if there's ever a point where that balance tips too far in one direction or the other. Are we on a path toward a future where mind control becomes a reality, or will we find ways to protect ourselves from these potential threats?
It's a question that has no easy answers, but it's one that we need to keep asking ourselves as we continue to explore these uncharted territories of science and technology. But let's get back to the specifics of these potential defensive measures. What kind of technology was supposedly behind these psi shields?
That's a good question. It sounds like something straight out of a science fiction movie.
Okay.
But if these devices actually existed, what were they made of? How did they work?
The sources are a bit vague on the specifics, but they suggest that these psi shields were designed to create a kind of barrier around an individual, blocking or deflecting harmful psychotronic emissions. Some theories propose using materials that absorb or neutralize these energies, similar to how a Faraday cage blocks electromagnetic radiation.
A Faraday cage for the mind. That's a pretty wild concept.
It is, and it highlights the challenge of protecting ourselves from technologies that operate on levels we may not fully understand. It's like trying to defend against a ghost. You can't see it, you can't touch it, but you can feel its effects.
That's a bit unsettling. It makes you wonder if we're even capable of defending ourselves against these kinds of attacks, especially if they're being carried out by governments or other powerful actors with advanced technology.
It's definitely a valid concern, but remember, throughout history, humans have always found ways to adapt and defend themselves against new threats, even those that seem invisible or incomprehensible at first. The development of psi shields, if they truly existed, would be a testament to our ingenuity and our determination to protect ourselves.
That's true. And the sources don't just focus on technological defenses, they also mention the concept of psychotronic hygiene.
Psychotronic hygiene. That sounds interesting. What exactly does that involve?
It's essentially the idea of taking proactive steps to protect our minds from harmful psychotronic influences, just as we take steps to protect our bodies from physical harm.
So, like mental self-defense training for the age of psychotronics, what kind of steps are we talking about?
The sources suggest a variety of strategies, including being mindful of our exposure to electromagnetic fields, developing mental resilience techniques, and practicing mindfulness and meditation to strengthen our mental focus and awareness.
That makes sense. If we can strengthen our minds and become more aware of our thoughts and emotions, we're less likely to be swayed by external influences, whether they're coming from a psychotronic generator or from more conventional forms of persuasion and manipulation.
Exactly. It's like building a fortress for the mind, equipping ourselves with the tools and techniques to withstand potential attacks.
It's a powerful analogy, and it highlights the importance of taking an active role in protecting our mental well-being, especially in a world where technology is becoming increasingly integrated into our lives and where the lines between the physical and the digital are blurring. But what about those who don't have access to this kind of training or technology? Are they left vulnerable?
That's a good question. It raises concerns about equity and access to resources, especially if psychotronic technologies become more widespread and more sophisticated. Will only the wealthy and powerful be able to afford to protect themselves?
It's a valid concern, and it highlights the need for education and awareness about these potential threats. The more people understand about psychotronics and its potential impact on their lives, the better equipped they'll be to protect themselves, even without access to expensive technology or specialized training.
Knowledge is power, as they say, and in this case, knowledge could be the key to protecting our minds from manipulation.
Absolutely. But the sources also suggest that psychotronic technologies aren't just about weapons and mind control. They also explore the potential for using these technologies for personal growth and spiritual development.
Really. So it's not all doom and gloom. There might actually be some positive applications for these technologies.
That's what the sources suggest. They point to the possibility of using psychotronic devices to enhance consciousness, promote healing, and even facilitate spiritual exploration. It's an idea that's been around for centuries, often associated with mystical traditions and practices like meditation, yoga, and energy healing.
So it's like merging ancient wisdom with modern technology. That's a pretty fascinating concept, but how exactly would that work?
The sources don't go into a lot of detail, but they suggest that psychotronic devices could be used to manipulate the subtle energy fields that are said to exist around all living beings, potentially influencing our thoughts, emotions, and even our spiritual experiences.
So we're talking about using technology to tap into the realm of consciousness and spirituality. That's a pretty bold claim.
It is, and it's one that's likely to be met with skepticism from both the scientific community and from religious and spiritual leaders. But it's also an idea that has the potential to transform our understanding of ourselves and our place in the universe.
It definitely raises some intriguing questions. If we can use technology to enhance our spiritual experiences, what does that mean for our understanding of spirituality? Is it still authentic if it's being facilitated by a machine?
Those are great questions, and they're questions that we're only just beginning to grapple with as technology continues to evolve and blur the lines between the material and the immaterial.
It's an exciting time to be alive. In a way, we're witnessing the convergence of science, technology, and spirituality in ways that were unimaginable just a few decades ago.
It's a time of both great promise and great peril. We have the potential to create a world where technology enhances our lives and helps us reach our full potential, but we also face the risk of these technologies being used to control and manipulate us, to undermine our freedom and our humanity.
It's a reminder that the future is not predetermined. It's something that we're actively creating through our choices, our actions, and our beliefs.
Well said, but let's get back to the specifics of Akimov's research for a moment. We were discussing his belief that torsion fields could be used for communication, potentially even faster than the speed of light. Do the sources provide any more details about his experiments in this area?
Yes, they do. One source describes an experiment where Akimov and his team supposedly transmitted information between 2 points that were separated by a significant distance. They claimed that the information was transmitted instantaneously, suggesting that it had bypassed the limitations of the speed of light.
That's a bold claim. If it's true, it would completely upend our understanding of physics.
Right. It would mean that Einstein's theory of relativity, which states that nothing can travel faster than the speed of light, is incomplete or even wrong. But of course, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And Akimov's experiments have been met with a lot of skepticism from the scientific community.
That's understandable. His work challenged some of the most fundamental principles of physics. And it's natural for scientists to be cautious about accepting such radical ideas without rigorous verification.
The source mentions that Akimov's experiments were not always repeatable, and that there were concerns about potential errors in his methodology. Some critics argued that he may have been misinterpreting his results, or that there were other explanations for the observed phenomena.
That's a common problem in fringe science. It's often difficult to replicate experiments and to rule out alternative explanations for the observed results. But even if Akimov's claims about faster-than-light communication turn out to be false, his research still raises some interesting questions about the nature of torsion fields and their potential applications.
It definitely does, and it's important to remember that science is a process of exploration and discovery. Not every experiment will lead to a breakthrough, but even those that fail can teach us valuable lessons and inspire further inquiry.
Absolutely. And Akimov's work has certainly inspired a lot of further research into torsion fields and their potential applications both within Russia and internationally.
Speaking of international research, one of the sources mentions the work of a group of American researchers who claim to have developed a device that can generate and manipulate torsion fields. They call it a torsion field generator. And they claim that it could be used for a variety of purposes, including communication, energy production, and even healing.
That's interesting. So Akimov's ideas are not just being explored within Russia. It seems like there's a growing international interest in torsion field research.
That's right. The source mentions that researchers in countries like China, India, and Japan are also exploring the potential of torsion fields. It seems like this is a field of research that's gaining momentum globally.
It makes you wonder what breakthroughs might be just around the corner, and what implications those breakthroughs might have for our understanding of the universe and our place within it.
It's an exciting time to be alive in a way, to witness the unfolding of these new scientific discoveries and emergence of new technologies that challenge our assumptions and expand our horizons.
It certainly is. But as we delve deeper into these uncharted territories, it's important to remember the lessons of history and to proceed with caution, wisdom, and a commitment to ethical principles.
Well said, and it's a reminder that science is not just about facts and figures, it's also about values, ethics, and the choices we make as individuals and as a society.
Absolutely. The pursuit of knowledge must always be tempered by a sense of responsibility, recognizing that our discoveries have the potential to both benefit and harm humanity.
It's a balancing act, for sure, and one that requires careful consideration and ongoing dialogue. But let's shift our focus back to the darker side of this research for a moment. One of our sources delves into the claims of a former KGB agent who alleges that the Soviet Union was actively developing psychotronic weapons as part of a secret program known as Project Zombie.
Project Zombie, that sounds ominous. What kind of weapons were they supposedly developing?
The source claims that these weapons were designed to manipulate the minds and bodies of individuals, turning them into mindless slaves or even killing them remotely.
That sounds like something straight out of a horror movie.
It does, and it's a reminder that the potential for misuse of these technologies is very real. The agent even claims that these weapons were tested on unsuspecting civilians, causing widespread psychological trauma and even death.
That's a horrifying thought, and it raises serious questions about the ethical boundaries or lack thereof that may have existed within these secret research programs.
It's a reminder that the pursuit of power can sometimes lead individuals and governments down very dark paths, particularly when those paths are shrouded in secrecy and operate outside the norms of accountability and transparency.
Absolutely, and it's a reminder that we need to be vigilant to question authority and to demand transparency from those in power. We can't afford to be naive or complacent when it comes to technologies that have the potential to be used for such harmful purposes.
The source also mentions the potential use of psychotronic weapons for assassination, claiming that individuals can be targeted and killed remotely using these technologies.
That's a chilling thought, and it's a claim that's been made about a number of high-profile deaths throughout history, often fueling conspiracy theories and speculation.
Right, but it's important to separate fact from fiction in these cases. It's easy to get caught up in the intrigue and mystery surrounding these alleged assassinations, But without solid evidence, it's difficult to say for sure whether psychotronic weapons were actually involved.
Absolutely. We need to be careful about jumping to conclusions, but we also need to be aware of the potential for these technologies to be used in such ways. It's a reminder that knowledge is power, and that power can be used for both good and evil.
But let's delve into the specifics of these alleged psychotronic assassination techniques. One of our sources describes a method that involves targeting an individual's unique bioenergetic signature,
Okay.
with a concentrated beam of psychotronic energy causing disruption to their nervous system, heart function, or even brain activity, leading to death.
That sounds incredibly sophisticated, almost surgical in its precision.
It is, and that's what makes it so terrifying. It's a weapon that leaves no trace, no bullet wounds, no obvious signs of foul play. The victim simply dies, seemingly of natural causes.
It's the perfect crime in a way. And it makes you wonder if there have been cases throughout history where psychotronic weapons were used, but their involvement was never suspected or proven.
It's a chilling thought, and it underscores the importance of continued research and investigation into these technologies. We need to understand how they work, what their capabilities are, and what safeguards can be put in place to prevent their misuse.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power, and in the case of psychotronic weapons, that power can be used for good or for evil. It's up to us to ensure that it's used responsibly and ethically.
The source also mentions a rather unsettling concept: the use of psychotronic technology for mass mind control, potentially influencing the thoughts, emotions, and behaviors of entire populations.
Mass mind control. That sounds like something straight out of a dystopian science fiction novel.
It does. But the possibility of its real-world application is both fascinating and terrifying. Imagine a world where governments or corporations could manipulate the minds of the masses, shaping public opinion, controlling behavior, and even suppressing dissent.
It's a scenario that has been explored in countless books and movies, but the thought of it becoming a reality is truly disturbing. It raises profound questions about freedom of thought, individual autonomy, and the very nature of democracy.
If our thoughts and actions can be manipulated by external forces, what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to have free will?
Those are questions that philosophers have been grappling with for centuries. But the advent of technologies like psychotronics adds a whole new dimension to the debate.
It's a debate that we need to have as a society as we confront the challenges and opportunities of this rapidly evolving technological landscape. We need to understand the potential implications of these technologies and develop safeguards to ensure that they are used ethically and responsibly.
Well said. But let's delve into the specifics of this alleged mass mind control technology. How would it work? What kind of methods are we talking about?
One of our sources describes a technique that involves beaming specific frequencies of electromagnetic radiation at targeted populations, disrupting their brainwave patterns and inducing altered states of consciousness.
So like a form of technological hypnosis or brainwashing.
Exactly. The source suggests that this technique can be used to create a wide range of effects, from inducing fear and panic to promoting feelings of euphoria and compliance.
It's a chilling thought. Imagine entire populations being manipulated into acting against their own interests, all without ever realizing that they're being controlled.
It's a terrifying scenario, and it raises the question, has this technology already been used? Are there historical examples of this kind of manipulation? One of the sources points to the Soviet bombardment of the American embassy in Moscow with microwaves as a potential example.
Wait, the Soviets bombarded the American embassy with microwaves. Why would they do that?
That's a good question, and one that has been debated for decades. The Soviets claimed that the microwaves were being used for surveillance purposes, but many in the West suspected that there was more to it than that.
So they thought it was a form of psychotronic warfare, trying to influence the behavior or health of the embassy staff.
Exactly, and there's some evidence to support that theory. The source mentions that embassy staff reported experiencing a variety of health problems, including headaches, fatigue, insomnia, and even cancer, which some attributed to the microwave exposure.
That's disturbing. But did they ever prove that the microwaves were the cause of these health problems?
It's difficult to say for sure. The source mentions that the U.S. government launched a program called Project Pandora to investigate the effects of microwave radiation on human health. But the results of that program remain classified, so it's hard to know what they actually discovered.
That's frustrating. It feels like we're dealing with a lot of shadows and whispers in this field of research. It's hard to get a clear picture of what's really going on.
It is,
Yeah.
but that's part of what makes this topic so fascinating and so unsettling. We're dealing with technologies that operate on the fringes of our understanding, technologies that have the potential to both heal and harm, to liberate and to enslave.
It's a powerful reminder that technology is a double-edged sword, and it's up to us as individuals and as a society to decide how we will use it, to ensure that it serves humanity rather than enslaving it.
Well said. And on that note, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Dr. Anatoly Akimov, torsion fields, and psychotronic warfare.
A fascinating topic.
Absolutely. We hope you found it informative and thought-provoking, and please don't forget to like and subscribe to Teolumen Insights for more deep dives into the mysteries of science and consciousness.
Until next time.